Yo peeps, welcome to the Conspiracy Cupboard. Today I'm going to be looking into starting the history of UFOs. Okay, so let's try and track this across history and let's see if we can work out a timeline that we can get to stuff that's going on today. Here we go. Cue the title sequence. Okay, so on the channel then, I'm going to be doing a couple more reviews because the review of Picard went quite well. But also, like I said, I'm going to be covering a lot more about UFOs, sightings in the UK, things about Bob Lazar. Stuff. I know people have done stuff about Bob Lazar. I'd like to do my own take on that. On Travis Walton, what's the deal with Travis Walton, and other people that are involved in this. So I'm going to mention Betty and Barney Hill today in this episode. So this is going to be a brief sort of bit of history from 1944 up to 1961. Okay, and that's as far as I'm going to go on this episode today. So it's going to cover a few little bits, and I'll be doing some more in-depth episodes, in-depth episodes about some of these subjects if I don't get to cover them fully today. So then, as I did on one of my previous episodes, what does the MOD know about flying saucers? I mentioned that in 1944, one of the first sightings was reported over the Rhine by a Boover bomber that was on its way back from a bombing run, and it was followed by 3 or 4 lights in the sky. They tried to attribute this to some kind of new German technology, okay? It was investigated, and these sightings became more and more frequent. Then in 1945, with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the sightings of these things became even more prevalent. I know I've got a vine in the back. Look, it's grown. They became even more prevalent, and more people were seeing these sightings. So the first actual time that a civilian pilot reported this was Kenneth Arnold in the USA. This was in 1947, so not long after the war. Kenneth reported seeing, I think it was three or four either dish shape or like boomerang sort of shaped objects flying together at high speed, like faster than his airplane, at probably supersonic speeds across the sky in front of him as he was flying over Mount Rainier, I believe it was. This is in 1947, so this was before any other Roswell incident or anything like that. After this sighting, I believe there was a couple more sightings over the USA. There were some more reported sightings from air traffic and stuff in the UK as well. And this led to Churchill, back in the UK, starting up what is called the Flying Saucer Working Party. So in America, they were slowly starting to investigate this stuff, possibly because they had taken on German scientists after the war in Project Paperclip and other projects like this. And they were looking into engineering. Now, I will be doing an episode on the Bell because it's a fascinating topic. If you've never heard of this, the Germans were supposed to be working on a machine called the Bell, which was an anti-gravitational device technology which could fly and basically take off, possibly retrofitted from a UFO that had been taken down. As we don't know what the Foo Fighters were, these UFOs that were seen back in the war, that were first seen in 1944 and through there by pilots, which they obviously named the Foo Fighters. We don't know what they were. So these could have been the Bell. They did try and attribute them to some German technology a lot later on called a Feuerball, which is basically like a airborne mine, which they tried to say, but the maneuvers that these things were doing when they're following aircraft around for hours and tailing them and stuff is not something that anyone at the time had any kind of technology to even go near. Going back to Kenneth Arnold then quickly, the crescent-shaped crafts, these objects, were said to be like saucers skipping along the water. And this was then reported many times after this. So a saucer or boomerang-shaped craft or some kind of triangular craft. And this is where we then get the Roswell incident. So the same year that Arnold saw flying objects, rancher W.C. Mac Brazel came across mysterious 200-yard long wreckage near the army field in Roswell, New Mexico. Local papers reported that it was the remains of a flying saucer. The US military issued a statement saying that it was just a weather balloon, though the newspaper photographs suggested otherwise. The flames of conspiracy were further fanned in the 1950s when dummies with latex skin and aluminum bones that looked like aliens fell from the sky across New Mexico and were hurriedly picked up by military vehicles. Those who believed the earlier Roswell sightings, this seemed to be like a government cover-up for the Air Force. These dummy props were also to test new ways of pilots to survive test falls. So now I'm not going to give anything to, take anything away from sightings that can be explained. There are many, many, many sightings that can be explained away. But as reported at Roswell, the wreckage was not of a weather balloon. The materials that this guy picked up actually echo in some later crashes, just like the one at Virginia in Brazil, where the guy found the wreckage and it crumpled up and went back into shape. This has been reported a few times at crash sites, but mainly at Roswell and at Virginia. It seems like the same kind of craft, possibly, that came down. Maybe it was a tic-tac shaped object. I'm not too sure. I don't know if you actually describe the shape of it. So, 50 years later, the military issued a subsequent statement admitting that the Roswell wreckage was part of a Project Mogul, a top-secret atomic espionage project. So, obviously, after Roswell then, and in between this time, we have Project Blue Book, which was obviously set up with J. Helen Hynek, who later on revealed that he didn't believe half of the things that he was selling people during these cases that he was basically dismissing in Project Blue Book. And there was at least 2 or 3 cases that he believed to be completely unexplainable, and the only way to explain it is close account of the third kind. He invented close account of the first kind, second kind, third kind. So the first kind is where you just see a UFO or something unidentified, yeah? The second is where you see this object or something weird and it affects you or affects the surrounding area, leaves a crop circle, leaves marks on the ground, burns, etc. Third kind, so closer to the third kind then, is where you are directly in contact with an alien or the vessel, or you are physically there taken, or you've seen something that's landed in front of you, you've got something there, and maybe you've got some physical evidence as well. That is a close account of the third kind. Project Blue Book. Sightings of unidentified aerial phenomena increased, and in 1948, the US Air Force began an investigation of these reports called Project Sign. Cold War tension was mounting, and the initial opinion of those involved was that UFOs were more than likely sophisticated Soviet aircraft. Although some research suggested they might be spacecraft from other worlds, the so-called extraterrestrial hypothesis, ETH. Within a year, Project Sign was succeeded by Project Grudge, and in 1952, itself was replaced by the long-lived and official inquiries into UFOs, Project Blue Book, headquartered at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, from 1952 to 1969. Project Blue Book comprised reports of more than 12,000 sightings or events, each of which was ultimately classified as identified with a known astrological, atmospheric, or artificial human-caused phenomenon, or 2 unidentified, the later categorizing approximately 6% of the total included cases of which there was sufficient information to make an identification or not a not known phenomenon. So JL and I actually made up a lot of these astrological terms then, ball lightning, these other terminologies, but he himself was not convinced by what he was saying. And later on, like I say, he became convinced we're being visited by something, whether it's another planet, another dimension, somebody was coming here. So that was between that time of 1952 to 1969 then. So not long after that then, in 1961, we have the first reported UFO abduction case, which was Betty and Barney Hill. Now, I'm starting with these guys on the abduction stuff. I've done 2 UK abduction cases, which you might not have seen. So if you go back through the videos, they're Todd Morton and the A70 incident in Scotland. There's some more to come as I dig out some more information. But what got me into these, obviously, is my love of Star Trek and sci-fi. But the Betty and Barney Hill case always fascinated me because at the time when they were abducted, it was September 19th, 1961. And at the time of where they lived in the state of New Hampshire, it was an interracial couple. She was white, he was black at the time. It wasn't, it still wasn't looked kindly upon in some parts of America. And their story is an absolutely fascinating one. They never came forward until, weeks after, when they were getting these strange feelings, strange thoughts, couldn't sleep. And it was Betty that came forward more than Barney. Barney was more reluctant to say anything. They're both sound of mind people, both had, really good jobs, had no need to make this up. So if you've not heard of the case, as they were driving home from an impromptu, honeymoon. So they were driving back to Portsmouth then, not Portsmouth, UK, but Portsmouth in America, from a vacation in Niagara Falls, which I believe was part of their honeymoon and Montreal, where they had been the day before, just south of Lancaster, New Hampshire. Betty claimed they have observed a bright point of light in the sky that moved from below the moon and the planet Jupiter, upward to the west of the moon. While Barney navigated US Route 3, Betty reasoned that she was observing a falling star as it moved upwards because it moved erratically and grew bigger and brighter. Betty urged Barney to stop the car for a closer look as well so that they could walk the dog, Desley. Oh my God, DLC. That's weird. I just realised that. Walk their dog, DLC. It's me. I'm a dog. Delcy. Barney. Fucking hell, their dog Delcy. I'm stuck on that now. Their dog was called Delcy. DLC. That's only just got me. Anyway, so Barney stopped at a scenic point just south of the Twin Mountain. Betty started looking through binoculars and observed an odd-shaped craft that was flashing multicoloured lights across the face of the moon. Because her sister had several years earlier said she had seen a flying saucer, Betty thought it might be what she was observing, although at first she thought it was a satellite, like I said, or some kind of falling star. Betty then observed what he reasoned to be a commercial airliner travelling towards Vermont on its way to Montreal. However, he soon changed his mind, because without looking as if it had turned, the craft rapidly descended in his direction. This object caused Barney to realise this object was not a plane at all. So the Hills then rushed back to the car. They continued on driving on the isolated road, moving very slowly through Franconia Notch in order to observe the object as it came even closer. At one point, the object passed above the restaurant and a single tower on top of Canyon Mountain and came out near the old man of the mountain. Betty testified that it was at least 1.5 times the length of the granite cliff profile, which was about 40 feet, 12 meters long, and it seemed to be rotating. The couple watched this silently illuminated craft moved erratically and bounced back and forth in the night sky. About 1 mile south of Indian Head, they said the object rapidly descended towards their vehicle, causing Barney to stop in the middle of the highway. The huge silent craft hovered about 80 to 100 feet, 24 to 30 meters above the hill. 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air. They had a Bel Air. West Philadelphia, born and raised. On the playground is where I spent most of my days. Chilling out, maxing, relaxing, all cooling on, shooting some people outside of the school. When a couple of guys that were up to no good started making trouble in my neighborhood. I got in one little fight and my mum got scared and said, "You move with your auntie and uncle to Bel Air." Well, I whistled for a cab, and when it came near, the license plate of fresh had a dice in the mirror. If anything, I could say this cab was where, but I thought, nah, forget it, you're home to Bel Air. I pulled up to house about 7 or 8 and I yelled to the cab, "You're home, smell you later." Looked at my kingdom, I was finally there, settled on my throne as the Prince of Bel Air. Yeah, cheers, Dave, thanks for that. Okay. So they get in their 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air. Don't do it again. And filled the entire field of view in the windshield. It reminded Barney of a huge pancake. Carrying his pistol in his pocket, he stepped away from the vehicle and moved closer to the object. Using the binoculars, Barney claimed to have seen 8 to 11 humanoid figures who were peering out of the craft's windows, seemingly to look at him in unison. All but one figure moved to what appeared to be a panel to the rear wall and of the hallway that encircled the front portion of the craft. The one remaining figure continued to look at Barney and communicated a message to him telling him to stay where you are and keep looking. Barney said he recollected and observed the humanoid forms wearing glossy black uniforms and black caps. Red lights on what appeared to be the bat wings fins began to telescope out of the sides of the craft. It reminds me of some kind of like Enterprise saucer section where the cells are strutting out. Something like that. A long structure descended from the bottom of the craft and silently approached what Barney estimated were 50 to 80 feet overhead, 300 feet, 91 meters away from him. On October 21st, 1961, Barney reported to National Investigators Committee on Aerial Phenomena investigator Walter Webb that the beings were somehow not human.
It was at this moment, beeping, when your memory returned. It's a time previous to this that you can't remember.
So, after he saw the humanoids then, Barney got back in the car, they all got back in the car and they drove off. For some reason, they ended up turning off the main route that they were on into some little dirt road and started going off in towards the woods. Now, they remember hearing a pinging sound, some kind of ping, pong, ping, that sounded like something hitting the back of their car. The next thing they know, they're waking up, driving back on the main road again, back out towards Portsmouth, back home. So it wasn't until they got home then, obviously, and they investigated the car. I mean, they had the wherewithal to take all their clothes off and put them to one side and basically just get in bed and get cleaning, you know, just get in bed. They knew something had happened to them. They couldn't figure out what it was. They had a weird feeling something had gone on, but they didn't speak about it. They just got in bed. Next morning, they reluctantly started to talk to each other. When they went out to get to the car to investigate, they found little like holes, but it wasn't holes, dents in the back of the car, which Betty and Barney assumed this is where these pinging noises must have come from. So whether it's some kind of beam fired at the car to induce some kind of hallucination or some kind of state on them to make them pull over, I don't know. So obviously they went under hypnotic regression in a regression session. The jazz all night long regression session. And during their regressions, then they obviously described this examination. Betty tried to fight off the aliens that were taking her into the craft. She didn't feel safe at first. Barney seemed to be more unconscious. He was sort of dragged on board the ship and he was experimented on in another room. So Barney's experience then was he had sperm taken from him. He can remember sort of being in and out of consciousness. He remembers screaming. He remembers being absolutely terrified at these beings. Betty, on the other hand, was at first scared. They examined her. They, did stuff to her, took her clothes off and examined her. And they put a needle through her navel to extract what only assumed to be ovaries, maybe something, some genetic material. And they apologized to her. One of the commanders apologized to her, basically, for causing any harm to her because she cried out in pain with this needle in her abdomen. So not long after this, she got dressed. She knew Barney was okay, and they were talking to her and basically asking her questions. What are you? We're humans. Who are you? We do this. Okay. How, I'm 30. How old are you? Age? What is age? Why do you age? Weird sort of questions that you wouldn't make up in your head. She got also shown a star map. When she asked where they were from, they said, "Where are you from?" Which she replied, "Well, I'm from Earth." "Well, where's that?" "I don't know." Well, me telling you where we are from is kind of irrelevant if you don't know where you're from in a way. But they drew her a star map, and the star map lines up to Zeta Reticuli system. There's too many details to this story for it not to be true. There was a residue left on her dress from the examination. It was torn as well from where she tried to get away from them. They grabbed her back. Barney had severe depression, severe anxiety episodes after this. And he died early as well of, I believe it was a heart disease. I can't remember off the top of my head now. But he died really young. And Betty never changed the story after Barney had gone. She continued to say exactly what had happened. So that's where I'm going to leave this episode for the minute. So I've covered a couple of pieces there, up to the Betty and Barney Hill stuff. And obviously, from there, that's where we get the classic descriptions of alien abductions, of the grey aliens, of this message to people. So this is where you have to be careful with abduction stories after this. This is why things like the Travis Walton abduction story which has 7 witnesses, including Travis himself, you know, 5 days missing time, etc., etc. That's where these cases where you can actually gather the evidence, you can see it's not completely the same, but it is the same. It's linking to this, it's got bits of this, but it's not that, you know, this is where you have to start looking. And if these people are all making it up, I mean, my God, what are they getting out of it? You know, I don't see any reason to make it up at all. So what I'm going to leave you with then is with the Roswell, after the Roswell incident and Area 51 then. So, because Area 51 is going to be covering up a lot. So in the 1950s and 60s, multiple UFO sightings were reported around Area 51 in Nevada, a site used variously by the CIA, US Air Force and Lockheed Martin to test flights of experimental aircraft or black aircraft. Declassified documents show Area 51 was home to a Cold War program called OpCart, dedicated to creating a spy plane that would be undetectable in the air and could be used to gather information behind the Iron Curtain. The resulting SR-71 Blackbird, F-117 Nighthawk, and the Archangel 12, A-12, travelled at speeds upwards of 2,000 miles an hour. These mysterious planes helped to fuel rumours that Area 51 was used to conduct experiments on extraterrestrial life and their spacecrafts. And that will lead me into the Bob Lazar story. So I'm going to be covering J. Allen Hynek, I'm going to be covering Bob Lazar. So if you're interested in Betty and Barney Hill, there's plenty of things out there to go and look at. There's plenty of documentaries done about them, and she never changed the story once. You know, there's physical evidence from that evening of their car, you know, the dents on the back of it. His binoculars were snapped because when he saw these beings, he just couldn't believe it. Snapped his binoculars, you know, the strap on it was broken. She got tears to her dress. And like I say, at this time, it was an interracial couple. If this had not happened and they'd not needed to come forward, they would not have come forward, you know. So that's what makes it more believable to me. So we've got World War II reports. We've got Kenneth Arnold leading us into the Roswell crash, where it was originally reported that a flying saucer came down and later covered up by the US government. And then, you know, other various incidents after that. We've got the flyover, which I'm going to cover, of 1955 of Washington, D.C., where 5-6 craft were seen coming over, and then another fleet of ships were seen coming over of lights and flying saucers, flying over Washington itself. And then we've got other various reports throughout there, which I can't cover all of them. I'll be picking out little bits and pieces from this episode and bits that I couldn't fit into this one. And then obviously we've got the Betty and Barney Hill case, which I've just given you the brief oversight of that. Leading us into Roswell and the Bob Lazar video that I'm going to be doing next. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've got any ideas or any bits that you would like to see, any actual UFO videos you would like me to do from this time period, 1950 to 1969, 1940s to 1969. In this time period, I know there's a lot of them. This is when a lot of the sightings came through. There's going to be some more that I'm going to be doing specific from the UK, from around the 1960s, early 70s as well, where people on farms, and then we've got the Rendlesham Forest case in the 80s, etc. So don't worry, those will be coming. I understand that a lot of people have covered these already, but they're important pieces of the puzzle for us to put together to understand what is happening now happened then. And this has been covered up for many, many years, and we need to know what the friggin' hell is going on. So like I say, I'm going to be doing the upcoming episodes of Bob Lazar, etc. I'm going to be doing a couple more reviews on Star Trek Picard and some Star Trek ships, my favourite Star Trek ships and stuff, because it's sci-fi, it ties in with the conspiracy cupboard. So I hope you tune in for those. And until next time, I've been Mischief. This is the title sequence again. See you later, folks.